Everybody. My name is Phil Kilbridge. I'm NatureBridge's president and CEO, and delighted to have you here for a conversation between Sally Jewell and Steve Lockhart. I'm here to welcome you, to orient you to a few things. You all are looking at the chat window. That is a great feature to engage with others in the audience. There may be some conversations happening and guided by Sally and Steve, but there's also a Q&A button. And that's where you can go ahead and type in questions that you would love to address to either Sally or Steve. I'll be joining them back at about 6:20 Pacific time to help facilitate that Q&A. The first 20 minutes is really just going to be an informal conversation between two very dear friends. A few other things to walk through. I want to thank our incredible sponsors, Clean Canteen and Fleet Feet, who've been with us for so many years and for sponsoring our Campfire chat series. This is our 50th anniversary, so we're going to have a whole bunch of 50th anniversary Campfire chats. If you're interested in getting involved with those as a sponsor, if you've got great ideas of programs, please let me know. My middle school classmate, Allison Witter-Frey, is on. Hello, Allison. So what I'd like to do right now is stop the screen share, and then I am going to introduce Dr. Steve Lockhart. So Steve, if you can join us on screen by turning on your video and unmuting. So Steve is Director Emeritus of NatureBridge's National Board. He is actually a former National Board Chair for NatureBridge. He, by day and by night, is the Chief Medical Officer of Sutter Health in California. But that ends soon, Steve. You're 1 week away from being officially retired. How's that feeling for you?
That feels great, Phil. It's a real blessing to have had so many years, 35 years of a tremendous opportunity to try to take care of patients and serve our communities by working with Sutter Health, which is another great organization. So I've been really lucky in that regard.
Brief and true story. Steve was most formally introduced to NatureBridge when, as an anesthesiologist, he put my predecessor under when he was going through surgery. And by the time that former CEO of then the Yosemite National Institutes woke up, Steve was, I think, chairing our capital campaign. So he wasn't out that long. But Steve, I'd like to invite people in. We've got a poll. We want to give you some advice, Steve, as to what you should do after retirement. For those of you who don't know Steve, he's a Rhodes Scholar. He's a former world-class 800-meter runner. He has an IQ of about 233. Give some advice as to what Steve should do in retirement. You just press one of those buttons, press submit. As we are bringing in all the poll numbers, Steve, as you look at those, is there one that you're most apt to do?
Well, certainly not run for office. Working for NatureBridge sounds fun, except for the work part. And I think enjoying himself and visiting the 63 national parks sounds like a plan to me. So I'm going to go with that.
And let's see, the answer is, Steve, you should visit all 63 national parks. Since I have only hit about 38, if you'd like to invite me on a journey to any of those, I would be delighted. Y'all are really waiting for, you've got one guest of honor, Steve Lockhart. We're going to bring our other guest of honor on. And Steve, you're going to introduce former Secretary of the Interior, Sally Jewell, and I'm going to let you two just get in conversation for everyone's enjoyment and edification. Thanks, Steve.
Sure. Thank you, Phil. And I want to also welcome all of our guests this evening. I assume everyone can see and hear me okay. These Campfire chats are really a great opportunity for us at NatureBridge to stay connected with our friends and supporters and also to meet new friends. So if you know other folks who might be interested in the magic that occurs when we introduce young people to the natural world through education about the environment, please bring them on. Speaking of bringing them on, I'd like to introduce a good friend of NatureBridge and a good friend of mine, Sally Jewell. Sally was the 51st Secretary of the Interior, and I will say the first and the best Secretary of the Interior we've had, at least in the recent memory, the last 240 years or so, under President Obama, but I'm not biased. And she also was the CEO of REI, as many of you may recognize her in that role as well. And prior to that, Sally was a member of the National Park Second Century Commission, which was a commission put together to really talk about the strategic plan for the next 100 years of the National Park Service following its centennial in 2016. And it's on that commission that we served together and we met and then became good friends. So Sally, welcome. Please join us. And there we are. It's good to see you, Sally.
Good to see you too. Gosh,
Yeah.
I seem to be now an interesting amber color, but you know, that's the way Zoom works. So that's all right. We'll roll with it.
Well, good. And I'm not sure if my video is showing up, but hopefully it is. If you all
Yes,
can
your
see
video
me.
showing up. You look great.
Oh, okay, great. Well, then that's wonderful. So I guess we could start this evening just talking about how we actually did meet. We were on the Second Century Commission, which of course was all about what the National Park Service should look like for the next 100 years. And what are your recollections around that, Sally, that you'd like to share? Maybe we can.
Oh gosh, so many of them, Steve. And I also will say I didn't join in the chat in terms of where I'm joining from, but I'll just begin with a quick land acknowledgement that I'm actually sitting on the land of the Coast Salish people in Seattle, Washington, and there's lots of folks from Seattle. So greetings from here, and expend my thoughts to those from Washington, D.C. in that region, given the horrifying events of last week. And I saw somebody from Olympia, Washington. We've had our own challenges in our state capital and state capitals around the country. So thank you, and please be safe and be sensible, because there are some dangerous folks out there. You know, Steve, it was interesting when I got called to join this Second Century Commission, and for those of you that aren't familiar with it, it's actually the National Parks Conservation Association that said, you know, got this centennial coming up. It was, you know, during Dirk Kempthorne's time as Secretary of the Interior at the end of the Bush administration. And he was thinking about how do we tee up the National Park Centennial in 2016. And so NPCA pulled this group together, and Steve was on it. And it was, you know, one of the great gifts of serving on that was to become a friend of Steve. But it was also historians from the National Park Service. Probably the most famous one of us would be Sandra Day O'Connor, you know, the first woman to serve on the Supreme Court. She was an interesting character. She's used to being in charge. Do you remember that, Steve?
I do. She was on the education committee that Milton Chen, who's also a friend of NatureBridge, and I co-chaired. Really, Milton was such an education expert. I really should say he really led us. But it was very interesting being in a meeting with Sandra Day O'Connor, who does not lack for opinions. So, and you have to make your argument to her. So that was a lot of fun, but it was very, very productive.
I remember that clearly. But, you know, my subcommittee was about connecting people with parks. And one of the things that I remember when I first got asked to do this, and I thought, oh gosh, you know, I'm running REI and there's lots going on. And, you know, 2007 to 8 wasn't the easiest time. It's when things were running up and then they crashed, right? So it was during the Great Recession. But I remember saying, you know, you've got these 5 topic areas laid out, but there's one missing, which is like, how do we make the parks relevant to people in the future? And how do we connect people with parks? Because there's such a gap in terms of who uses our park and who our population represents. So, you know, Steve had Milton Chen, who's fantastic with Edutopia and the great work that he's done, and Justice O'Connor, who is, you know, brilliant and likes to be in charge. And I had Maria Hinojosa from Latino USA, and Carolyn Finney, who for a time was at Berkeley. I think she's now in Kentucky, who wrote a book called Black Faces, White Spaces, the relationship of African Americans to national parks and the great outdoors, or something like that. And I'll tell you, I learned so much from working on that commission. And Steve, you know, you told me a story about your family, and I think we were sitting in dinner up in a little restaurant when we could actually eat together and spend time in a room together before we knew how many of our germs we were exchanging. Right. But that little restaurant, you talked about your family's background and just like how few generations from slavery. And also over the course of our getting to know each other, you talked about your connections to the outdoors and how that happened. And I don't know if this audience has heard that, but you know, I'd love you to share that like you did with us, because it was powerful and it moved me.
Well, thanks. Yeah, no, I'm happy to share that, and I appreciate that because for those who don't know, I'm a Midwestern kid, born and raised in St. Louis. My family's from Springfield, Illinois, but they've been there for a long, long time. You know, pre-Civil War, pre-emancipation, and my grandmother's father actually was born in 1850. My grandmother was born in 1890. He was born in 1850, a slave. And in fact, all of my family, I think what may have come up because we were talking about Lincoln, and you know, all of my family is in Oak Ridge Cemetery, which is where Lincoln's tomb is. And interestingly enough, they're about 100 yards from Lincoln, right in the colored section of the cemetery, which I think is a very great honor for Lincoln. Of course, I think that was not how it was intended, but you know, there's a lot of direct linkage to coming from Kentucky into Illinois because of Lincoln and the Emancipation. And what I love about our parks actually is that history, the history of Manzanar and the history, all of these, the history of Native Americans and the Buffalo Soldiers and all of that history is in our national parks. And it's a way, you were talking about making it relevant. So it's a way to really understand what our diverse nation is about and connect those kids to their own heritage, their own stories. And then my sort of connection with the outdoors started actually through the Boy Scouts and my uncle, who it was a segregated troop because that was the time that we lived in. And you know, what I found was all the limitations of segregation that existed in our society. The outdoors was the opposite. It was freedom. It was nothing but outdoors. You could run around in the trees. There was no limitations to the discovery, to learning, to just having fun. As you said in your initiative, learn, work, play, and serve. You can do all of those things in the outdoors, no matter who you are. So that was really, really a great thing. And you know, Sally, I'm wondering, since we're talking about connections to the outdoors when you're young, I wonder if maybe this is a time we could do a little quick poll of our audience to just see when did your first memorable experience in the outdoors occur? Okay, so if you'd like to go ahead and quickly sort of click on this, submit your answers. We'll just see what our audience's experiences have been.
Well, while we're waiting, Steve, I'll say, you know, it was early for me, and it was profound. You know, I'm an immigrant from England, and it was my father coming here actually joined REI. He asked people, he's a doctor, actually an anesthesiologist like you. And he went to his colleagues at the University of Washington Medical School where he was working and said, what do people do around here? This is 6 months before the family immigrated and I was 3 years old. And he was told, well, they camp and they hike and they go join this little co-op called REI. So that was some of my first experiences, and looks like that's pretty consistent with our poll too.
Yeah. Well, I think what's really interesting here is that point that, you know, when we were talking the other day that you were making, that we learned in the Second Century Commission, all these stories, they seem to really originate in the first decade or so of life. It's really all about getting young kids out and connected. And then they have a lifetime of engagement with the outdoors, which is really wonderful.
You know, one of the things that just struck me, and I'll go back to two of my colleagues on the Second Century Commission, Maria Hinojosa and Carolyn Finney, both of them women of color, both of them introduced to the outdoors as children. Maria to all of the national parks in Mexico before she set foot in her first national park in the United States when she was in her 30s. Carolyn in rural Connecticut, because her family was the caretaker of someone's second home from New York City. And so she grew up immersed in nature and going to school there. And, you know, I think those stories, your story, Steve, of your uncle and the Boy Scouts is indicative of just how important it is for young people to connect early. And, you know, I think it's one of the reasons NatureBridge is so important. And I just love the fact that you're now in Prince William Forest Park, right? Because, you know, that is a site that tells a story of our history, our painful history of segregation, of soup kitchens and malnourished children, but also a story of nurturing them back to health in nature, weighing them every day, giving them healthy food. And it was a
Right.
segregated CCC camp,
Correct.
the Black from white. And the camps were identical. So sort of the beginning perhaps of separate but equal. But they knew that nature would heal even back in the 1930s.
Well, I don't know if you you probably recall this, that Director Jarvis came out at one point, and of course, because it's DC area, there are a lot of kids of color who attend, and they saw actually a photograph that was up on the mantelpiece of the lodge from 1938, I believe, that showed these kids standing around the flagpole. They were all African American, of course, because it was segregated, with the flag going up. And they actually, on their own, decided to recreate that photograph. And we pulled John Jarvis in, and we have a recreation, and I think it was 2010 maybe, or something. I don't remember the year exactly, maybe 2012. And they themselves saw themselves in that photo and wanted to recreate it. And it literally brought me to tears, because I thought that this is what it's all about, really connecting kids with their heritage, making them understand that there's a place here for them, that this is where they belong. You know, it's not just where you live, but where you're welcomed, and they're welcome here. So that was really, really very, very, very powerful.
I've seen that photo.
Yes.
And it brings me to tears too, which is not difficult for those who know me. Oh,
There it is. Wow.
Right,
Speaking, it just shows up. That's it. And so for the viewers, on the left is that 1938 photograph. And on the right, the color, the black and white, is on the left. And then on the color is the current NatureBridge photo, which I think was, several years ago now. But that's what we have. That's what we're doing. That's what we're recreating for our youth. And it's really very powerful. I wonder in our audience tonight too, if we might ask who facilitated. I talked about my uncle and getting out, and I know you talked about Carolyn and Maria and how they managed to get connected. Who was the first, who facilitated your earliest and deepest connections with nature? I believe we have a poll here as well for that. Okay, so just if you'd like to click in, parents, family, school, friends, there are some choices there. And as we're talking about that, maybe I would share, I'll go off script for just a moment to share that you and I have managed to get into some trouble, good trouble, as the phrase goes, in the outdoors. It's been a way in which we've been able to enjoy time together as well. This is a photo. I don't know, Sally, you want to comment on the circumstances of this?
Yeah, this was our attempt to climb Mount Rainier together. It was 2012. It was a super fun trip to be with Steve, and we actually were with Tom Kiernan, who's the head of the National Parks Conservation Association. It looks like the pole just jumped right over the top of our picture.
Yep, there we go. But parents and family, that's how it goes.
Yep, parents, family, friends, and then, other organizations is doing okay there too.
Yeah, they are. They are.
That says a lot. Yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway, we had a fun climb, except that it was not successful. We decided to tangle with a few thunderstorms, not to mention the fact that I, for some stupid reason, grabbed the wrong boots and crampon mix. So my crampon kept falling off. So it's probably just as well that we got turned back, because it would have been a tricky climb with a crampon. I would have had to hold on with duct tape. But
you could have done that, I'm sure.
Yeah,
we just couldn't control the lightning or whatever. I think that was a little
control
harder.
the lightning. Nope, the lightning was. We decided that the lightning won, and we came down fast. We did not linger.
Yeah.
And then, as I recall, maybe we had a cocktail.
Yeah, I think that was the high point of the of the whole thing. So.
Oh, the other thing I remember is we had to cross a river to get there. Right. And the river was low because we went early in the day, and then we came back and it was a sunny day, and the river was a raging torrent, and we needed Tom Kiernan's like super long legs to be able to get across.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I was just going to mention a big thank you to Tom Kieran, and he's probably the reason that I made it back, because Tom, for those who don't know, Tom, who was a NatureBridge board member, and I believe chaired the the East Coast region board also, but he's a big river guide kind of guy, so he was able to direct me how to safely get across, as opposed to doing the stupid things that I was probably going to do that would wind up with me somewhere 100 miles down the river. But yeah, so these are all the great adventures, the things that you can do when you are exposed at a young age to nature. So Sally, I know we have some questions that'll be coming in a moment, but just before we get to these questions that we're going to ask the audience to, we're going to open up to the audience in a little bit and ask them to put it in the Q&A portion, not the chat, but in the Q&A. I thought maybe we'd talk for a moment around this idea of, we met looking at the national parks and 100 years, what the last 100 years was like, what the next 100 years should be like. And NatureBridge is turning 50 this year. And so we've had 50 years. For those who saw the intro, there are lots of great photos from 1971 up to the present. But what are we thinking about in terms of the next 50 years? How do you see the relevance of NatureBridge? How do you see this playing out in a post-COVID world? Do you have some thoughts on that we can chat about?
Yeah, first, I think it's just incredible that NatureBridge has been around for 50 years. And so congratulations to everybody associated with the organization on getting to this milestone. You know, I think if there's a silver lining from the pandemic, it is that we all now have a deeper appreciation for nature. Parks, open spaces, places to get out. We feel like caged kitties everywhere. And children in particular, not being able to go to school, trying to do Zoom classes, just the craziness of not being able to connect with your friends. Being able to connect in a park or outside is just more important than it's ever been. So you got to combine that, I think, awakening with the demographics of our country, which are becoming more urbanized. It's true all over the world. People are moving to cities and away from rural areas. And, how do we bring nature into their everyday lives? But more than that, how do you have a deep experience in nature that helps you understand that we are part of nature? And that's where an organization like NatureBridge, I think, in its next 50 years is just going to be far more important than its last 50 years. Right. The very unfortunate circumstances NatureBridge has had to deal with forest fire in California are indicative of climate change and, the challenges that these young people are going to face as they deal with the consequences of the actions of the generations before them. It's you have to have people that understand what's going on and people that understand and see the changes. So when I think about, my favorite proverb, we don't inherit the earth from our ancestors, we borrow it from our children. And I think as we reflect now on this earth that we borrowed from our children, we've made a bit of a mess of it. We haven't always understood it, but we have understood it for a long time and we haven't done anything about it. How do we set them up for success? And part of that is just understanding what's there, understanding the science, understanding the people who've taken care of these places since time immemorial as the original stewards of the land, the indigenous people who were part of all of these landscapes. And NatureBridge can do that in a way that sticks. Right. And this notion of, and I saw David J.O.'s name go by. David ran the youth initiative for us at the Department of the Interior, which is that coining that concept of it begins with play, and then it's about learning, and then it's about service in public land, and hopefully some will end up working there. So play, learn, serve, work is a continuum. Every Kid in a Park Pass for fourth graders, that was to lower a barrier and to welcome kids into the outdoors. But in our work together at REI and our work together at Interior, we recognize that the experiences needed to be deeper, to be sticky. to get people over that fear or get their families over that fear. And that's exactly what NatureBridge does. And I just think it's going to be more and more important in this increasingly urbanized world and this planet, the natural world that's in trouble.
Right. Well, thank you for that. And I certainly agree. I mean, I think this notion of depth, multiple exposures, partnerships, you know, the fact that we can expose a kid through NatureBridge, maybe we get them involved with, you know, other organizations, maybe they work with SCA for a while, you know, they graduate into other things, they become REI members, or they just, you know, become people who are just firefighters and teachers and bankers and normal citizens. Some of them become park service leaders as well, but you know, who have this love for the outdoors and can sort of spread it through. And we saw there that parents is really important. So a lot of those people become parents and then transfer that to their children. And so I see Phil looming, because I know we have a lot of questions in the Q&A. So I think I am going to stop speaking now for a moment and just bring Phil back so we can facilitate some Q&A with you.
Yeah,
Sally.
we've really asked Steve and Sally to not have to pay attention to the Q&A, but let me dive in there, and you can put your own questions in there and you can upvote others. Sally, we had two pre-conversations. You asked us to steer clear of politics, and yet there's some questions in here. I'm going to give you plenty of permission to navigate around them. But one question that's gotten upvoted a lot: say you were President-elect Biden's choice for Secretary of the Interior. I'm going to make it a smaller question than was asked. What's one priority you would put out there yourself for either national parks or youth, and maybe one other in the entire breadth of what's under the Interior Department's control, one other thing that you would prioritize in January of 2021?
Yeah, and you know, politics are only tricky because you want to be respectful for all kinds of different points of view. And Deb Haaland, who's been nominated to the role, is still in her confirmation process, and I don't want to say anything that could make that tricky for anybody. As I mentioned, our planet's in trouble. The Department of the Interior plays a major role. It can be part of the problem and has been in some ways over the years past. It must be part of the solution. And thinking about how our public lands can help be a solution to climate change is really, really important for this administration. When we have, you know, 10,000 unused permits to drill for oil and gas, and something like 50 to 60% of all leases not drilled, do we really need to lease more for oil and gas? Places like the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge, which are going to be enough trouble with climate change, should not be drilled ever. Now, Congress did that. How do we migrate from this looking in the rearview mirror of fossil fuel consumption, which has damaged our planet in some ways irreparably, and look to a brighter future? How do you stand up renewable energy? How do you recognize the value of nature? You know, there's a phrase which many people on this call will know called ecosystem services. What's the value of a forest in its present state for clean water, for clean air, for carbon sequestration, for recreation, for quality of life, for all of those things? And Interior, with 20% of the nation's land and overseeing the mineral rights across the country, including 1.7 billion acres of the outer continental shelf, a major, major role to play. The other thing I would say does get to youth. And, you know, one of the things that when I was CEO of REI, I urged the brand new Obama administration to do, and Ken Salazar, the Secretary of the Interior, when they were thinking about stimulus in the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act, I said, please, 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 can you bring back a modern version of the CCC? Which they didn't do. They did other priorities, which were also very important. And I talked to Ken Salazar and he was sympathetic. And I said, you know, like he said, yes, we're working on that. It's the 21st Century Conservation Service Corps. And we think we can get 5,000 young people. And I said, 5,000? I'm thinking like 5 million. So anyway, that was Ken Salazar's first introduction to me. But I do think that he's forgiven me. And, David Jao and I worked with the private sector to fund, we got 100,000, right? It wasn't 5 million under me either, but building ways to deepen connections for young people to the outdoors, I think is really important. And if Deb Holland is confirmed, as a Native American, she will bring a connection to land that is unique and goes back to time immemorial. And I think that perspective could be really, really helpful to our nation and its healing. So anyway, those are two areas I'd look hard at: climate change and solutions, natural climate solutions, and continuing to engage youth.
Great, thank you so much. And Sally, you actually, through that answer, addressed a number of the other questions that were loosely coming up, including a brief introduction to the Secretary of the Interior nominee, Deb Holland. Any other insights that you have about her background or her connections to natural resources committees or anything else that would be helpful for our audience to know just what she uniquely may bring to the table?
Well, I'm getting to know her myself as well. I will say, some of my volunteer activity involves Native American youth, and she has always been there. And they have a youth ambassadors program for that is just beginning. In fact, REI is sponsoring it to engage tribal youth in advocating for nature and the natural world. And so she's been a great supporter there. I think she's been on the House Natural Resources Committee, but she's just beginning her second term as a representative. So we didn't actually work together because she wasn't in Congress at the time I was there. But delightful, caring human being. And she has reached out and is studying hard. And I think knows that, we all come in with a set of skills that are unique, and you build out a set of skills with a team that you have. And I'm sure that she'll do a good job of that. And there's a lot of good people around that want to be helpful.
Great. The next question, thank you so much, Sally. The next question is going to be something that I'd like both of you to talk to each other about or share. The pandemic has, it's forced kids onto these all day long. You've mentioned it in this conversation. It's highlighted a real critical need for outdoor spaces, for recreation, for social emotional learning. Just talk for a few minutes about what will the lasting impact of COVID-19 and this pandemic be on people's perceptions on the need for outdoors, and just guesswork looking into the future, and what will the legacy, positive or negative, be from this pandemic?
Oh, that's a really complex question, but obviously it's a very important one because we're living it right now. I think the real question is, there have been a lot of learnings from this pandemic, and my question is how much of it will stick? If you look at what has happened, for example, when we go to these shelter-in-place, stay-at-home orders, we see the air pollution levels drop. We see the planet is taking a breath. So is that something that we'll remember when it comes to our need for renewable energy and alternative sources of energy? Is that something that we'll think about when we teach our kids about how we consume and how we, our carbon footprint? Will that be perhaps a lesson that can be taught to our children, both in school and as well as organizations like NatureBridge and so forth? So I think there are a lot of lessons there for us to understand. Do we actually need to be, in cars all the time? And then what are the health benefits of being outdoors, and are those available to everybody? So that's the other piece I think that's really important, is around equity. We saw that COVID-19 sort of, as I always say, it rips the Band-Aid off of the structural inequities in our society and in our healthcare system overall, disproportionately impacting communities of color. But guess what? That's true of our environmental access as well, right? Access to green space is not equitably distributed. And so is that something that we're going to address so that all kids of all races, ethnicities, backgrounds, socioeconomic backgrounds have the opportunity so that it's not a matter of privilege, it's actually a matter of right. The kids have to get outside and enjoy nature, not just to have fun, but also to be healthy, to be mentally, physically healthy, and to learn. So, I think really the lessons are there. The question is, will we heed them? So.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. And I'd say, unfortunately, the disparate impact, the inequities that Steve referred to, I think will make the connections to nature and the outdoors better for those with access and worse for those that don't. You think about children struggling with broadband access, parents working outside the house and essential functions, if they're working at all, the inability to really engage in online classes because of some of those gaps. And then, living in an apartment building, or the inability to have space to go safely outside, I think I don't know. I mean, I've got 3 grandchildren, 14, 13 today, and 6. And it's rough on them. The online schooling is rough. Some are handling it better than others. And in our case, the parents basically are saying, getting an outdoor experience, like, my granddaughter's 13th birthday is today, and, her gift from me is to take her out skiing. And our gift for the family was an outdoor adventure for Christmas. That's not what everybody experiences. So I think it's certainly not all good, but for those who have had an opportunity to get to a park and a natural place, I think the level of comfort has gone up. The amount of diversity that I see in my city parks is way higher than it was before. The amount of engagement, the amount of pets, all of that could have a very positive impact. So I think it's mixed, honestly, but I do hope that we pay attention to the inequities, and I do hope organizations like NatureBridge and the supporters of this wonderful organization will continue to support it in a way that provides the opportunities for those who can't afford it otherwise, because I think it's life-changing.
Agreed.
Sally, in the chat window comes a note from Aroda Altum. I think I've heard of her before, and she basically prompts what you just said, and I'm just going to read this. Can you please discuss the value and related cost of getting kids into parks? For example, Sally, your program, Every Kid in a Park, which averaged $10 a kid to subsidize their visits to national parks and outdoor spaces. But what's the real cost? What's the cost for NatureBridge to do the same program and get them into an immersive experience? But she just believes, and she writes, it's such a great place to spend philanthropic funds. So anything on that, on the barrier to that inequitable distribution of green spaces, but how do you break down those barriers? For those who were on a call or on a campfire chat with Dr. Nasheen Razani 2 calls ago, we did talk about this, but from your perspective, Sally and Jewell, Sally and Steve, thoughts on the cost of actually addressing that gap?
Yeah, well, I deeply appreciate Rhoda, who sits on the board of the National Park Foundation, and it has a funding mechanism to, I mean, you can give a child a pass, but if their family doesn't have a car or they don't have access, they need some form of subsidy. And I'm going to just tell a quick story, if that's okay, because that's what people remember. So when we launched the Every Kid in a Park Pass, and I got so many stories of picking apart dried poop with kids, on a hike by Las Vegas in the Red Rock National Recreation Area, which is BLM lands. But the one I was going to say was taking kids to the Channel Islands National Park, where, partnership actually was the Nature Conservancy and the Park Service and the Fish and Wildlife Service in the state of California had worked to eradicate invasive species, mostly invasive animals on this island, to bring back the endangered Channel Islands fox. a group of school kids from Central Valley on the other side of the mountains, almost all of them Hispanic, um, had been with their teacher learning about the endangered Channel Islands fox. And Monique Navarro was a ranger, and she'd been going over periodically to their class and giving them material and information. So in an opportunity to give them their national park pass, we all went over to Channel Islands. So that means you got to get a boat, right? The rangers have to go, the teachers have to go, you have to get a bus to get them across the mountains. But let me just tell you, someone was smiling down on us. On the way over there, we had dolphins, and then we had whales breaching. I'm not kidding. And then when we got to the island and the kids offload their stuff and they're super excited, and the rangers just, talking to them, and it's an engaging. I mean, there were probably 100 kids. They get to the island and, they unload their stuff and they're very excited. And what do you think the first thing is that they see?
The fox.
A fox. Endangered Channel Islands fox. That will never leave those kids. So it is expensive. I don't know what the cost was per child, but it was probably, $50 to $100. But those are children that would never have had an opportunity to go there. And, we said, how many of you have been to the beach before? And quite a few had not. A lot of them had never been to a national park. But the opportunity to take a program like that and work with the Park Service on that learn component, play, learn, serve, work. If play just means get comfortable in the outdoors, learn is about just deepening that connection and nurturing that curiosity. So philanthropy is a very, very important aspect. And also just, if the kids can lead the parents, which was part of this, if you can get over the barrier, if it costs you to get into the national park, you just take your carload and go. That's really helpful, but all kids don't have access to that. So philanthropy is very, very important, but also the pass itself, I think, has energized that. And by the way, Trump administration tried to take it away and Congress codified it. So it's in law now. That program will continue.
Okay. I'm just going to be really brief here, Phil. I'm just going to flip the script and say, what's the cost of not doing it? And I think that to me is what is terrifying. What does it mean if we have a society in which our kids are not able to have access to things that not just enrich their lives, but really cement our future as a country? I mean, don't forget, these are democratic principles and norms that exist in the very fact that our parks are the people's parks, and that this nature is something that we all share, the shared destiny that we have. And that gets generated, as we saw, from a very, very early age. So how do we take kids in Baby Hunters Point who live at a Superfund site, and take kids who live in privileged areas who, as Sally said, get to go skiing, whatever, and bring them onto the same page where they can all appreciate the importance, the value of a healthy environment to support our health, to support our economy, to support life itself, and our civil society, right? How can we pull them all together? And that's a big investment. But if we don't invest in that, that's an investment in our future. So I would encourage anybody. I mean, that's why I know for myself, Karen, my wife, for those who know her, for us, that's the biggest investment we're going to make. And that's sort of why we're here. Because without that, I'm not sure where we go. And I'm an optimist, so I have to believe that it's worth the investment.
Sally and Steve, I need to mention the number of outstanding questions that are being typed and voted up. And by the way, the people who are writing them, I mean, I see Carl Pope on the list writing questions. I see James Mills, but James did note that you sort of answered his question with that closing, Steve. So to all of you who've asked great questions, sorry we couldn't get to all of it, but I thought that the richness of your conversation really calls out opportunity as we move forward. I, like you, Steve and Sally, am an optimist. I believe that we have opportunities to improve each and every day. NatureBridge can be an outstanding convener for youth. We are grateful for your time. We're grateful for your passion, for your leadership, for when you go into retirement. you only double down on what you do to make this world a better place, both of you. So Sally and Steve, thank you for joining us. To the multiple hundred people who joined us from all across the country and a few foreign countries in here, thank you for being with us tonight. We're going to continue a series of campfire chats with incredible, outstanding guests from a broad spectrum of different backgrounds. And in this, our 50th year at NatureBridge, you'll learn a lot more about equity and inclusion. You'll learn a lot more about engaging youth in the outdoors. You'll learn a lot more about the critical need for scientific education and next generation science standards for kids to become informed members of our electorate and our democratic society moving forward. With that, I thank you all, and I wish you all a great evening. Good night, Sally. Good night, Steve. Good night, everyone.
Get out in nature, everyone. It's a healing, and it's nonpartisan.
There you go.
All right.
Good night, everybody.
Night.